On behalf of the Rabbinical Assembly and the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, I welcome you to the International Seminar for Halakhic Study 5779. I am Rabbi Avram Israel Reisner, a congregational rabbi and adjunct professor in Baltimore, Maryland, and a longtime member of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. The committee is a group of 25 rabbis appointed by the various arms of the conservative movement who meet to consider questions of halakha, that is, questions of Jewish law and behavior that are addressed to us by our colleagues. These may be questions regarding Shabbat or Kashrut observance, about synagogue practice, or about new technological developments that impact Jewish practice. What is common to all of them is that they are dilemmas that are new and can benefit from a careful consideration by the group. Each she'elah, each question, is tackled first by a single author whose tshuvah, or answer, formerly known as a responsum, is then considered and revised by the committee as a whole until a majority of the committee can agree on a proposed answer. Sometimes we do not agree, and in that case, we issue two different suggestions. We'd like you today to shadow us on our deliberations on one such issue that came before us. The tshuvah we will be studying today is titled Wired to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Minyan via the Internet. The she'elah, the question, assumes the common Jewish practice of requiring a quorum of 10, a minyan, for public prayer. Anyone who's been involved with synagogue prayer over the years is likely to be familiar with this requirement. We often find ourselves seeking a 10th person to allow prayer to begin. The question is occasioned by new technology, the internet, the ubiquity of the smartphone. Though in 2001, when this tshuvah was considered, the World Wide Web was just a decade old, and iPhones were still several years in the future. Can one use this revolutionary new technology to form a minyan? But a word is in order about this common practice. Why should one need a minyan to say a prayer at all? Let us take Kaddish as an example. Why should I need a quorum of 10 to speak God's praises? Should it not be praiseworthy to say, magnified and sanctified be the name of the Almighty, regardless of the presence of or absence of a minyan? If it is the need of someone to respond with Yehei Shmei Rabbah that motivates needing a quorum, why require 10, not just 2 or 3? Formally, the tradition's answer to the latter question is that we learn the notion of a quorum of 10 from Torah. In the Babylonian Talmud, the Bavli, on Megillah, page 23b, and elsewhere, several proofs are offered. Primary among them is the notion that God should be sanctified in a congregation, Hebrew, edah, and that word edah is used elsewhere to describe the 10 spies of the Bible who scouted the land of Israel, then spoke against going forward. Though they're hardly role models, we see that an edah, a congregation, consists of 10. Other ideas. Jacob sent 10 sons down to Egypt to purchase grain. That is, his 12 sons less Joseph and Benjamin. Or, in arguing the case to save Sodom, Abraham did not propose that a number of righteous less than 10 might save the city. Whatever biblical reference you prefer, these are technical, scholastic sources for the need for 10 specifically. The question remains, why require a congregation at all? This tshuvah, proposes a way to understand that choice. Do you find that understanding compelling? What you think about the reason is liable to affect the solution you arrive at concerning the permissibility of forming a minyan through the internet. In any case, the tradition clearly does codify the requirement of 10, and any extension of the halakha must be consistent with that. In writing any teshuvah, the first order of business is to determine what traditional halakhic texts are relevant to the question and what it is they have to say about it. Obviously, were there a clear ruling on point, there would be no reason for the question to begin with. So one should not expect to find a traditional text that says one is permitted to count persons in a minyan who are connected to you by the internet. But there may be, and probably will be, texts that talk about what constitutes a minyan, and the task will be to try to extrapolate reasonably therefrom. If you were to find a text that said that to be counted in a minyan you must be within arm's length, that would have obvious implications for our question. If you were to find a text that said to be counted in a minyan you must be holding a siddur, a prayer book, that would set up a different set of expectations and ramifications. Your task as a posek, as a decider of Jewish law, is to fairly and reasonably assess the precedents that you find and understand not just the specifics of what they tell you, but also the reasons for those prior rulings and the implications thereof for the new situation that you are examining. To do that well, you need to be open to the factors that were driving the arrival at the precedent decisions that you found, and the factors that are present in the situation that you have before you in the she'elah, the question that lies before you. This is a bit like a chess player surveying the board before him or her and assessing the power lines that will come to the fore later in the match. No teshuvah is only about itself. Each teshuvah is one development in a halakha, a Jewish behavior, that will, God willing, continue long into the future. Ultimately, the question a posek must ask is not only what follows most reasonably from the precedent that I see, but what decision in this case will yield the strongest, most tenable position for the future. As you will see in a moment, on page 2 of the teshuvah, I find one source that requires that a minyan be made up of people in the same room, and another that assumes that someone outside of the room where prayers are underway may count those prayers to fulfill their own prayer obligations. These sources appear to be in conflict. Was the person who was not in the room part of the group saying those prayers, or not? Medieval commentators propose a way to reconcile those apparently conflicting texts, and their resolution is accepted by later codifications. What are the implications of that solution to our problem? On the 3rd page of the teshuvah, I offered what I call philosophical considerations. These were an attempt to approach the problem from other vantage points, thought experiments, in the vein of the rabbinic turn it over and turn it over, intended to convince first me, then others, that the implications that I had drawn from the sources were cogent. Does anything here move you? Remember the question, what decision in this case will yield the strongest, most tenable position for the future. In the tshuva you will be working through in the next few minutes, on the 5th page, a major issue is that of Kaddish. Kaddish is a basic prayer of praise of God that has, over the years, gained a special meaning for those in mourning for a loved one. In its origins, it was a part of the prayer service that specifically required a quorum, and it was especially beloved. As such, it was very early assigned in certain places during the service as a special preserve to be said by those in mourning to express their love of God even in tragedy. It came to be thought of as a prayer for the welfare of the deceased, who were assumed to be undergoing trial before God, and it was considered of major importance that it be said by a surviving relative in honor of his or her deceased loved one. Be this right or wrong, people argue about this, that feeling continues to hover about Kaddish today, and many are strongly insistent on the need to say Kaddish when in mourning. This special pressure to say Kaddish with the minyan impacts the question of how easily a minyan can be convened. If a minyan may be convened by people who are not physically together through their video connections, especially now, given the ubiquity of cell phones, that would make gathering a minyan much easier and more efficient than having to bring 10 people together, as has been the case in the past and would remain the case if minyan via internet is not permitted. Is that an important enough reason to permit it? Because the technology is new, the question is legitimately new. Which decision is most in line with prior precedent? Which is most desirable in terms of the needs of the current and future community? Which is most defensible as a statement of our values? Good luck. I hope you will find the study rich and enriching.